I don't mean any harm. Moved by admiration and no small envy for the marvelous gesture, I resolved to try it myself. The train stopped at a small rural station. A stranger joined our group in the carriage. When our eyes met for the first time, I gave the little wiggle of my head and a smile. The result was astounding. The man beamed a smile at me so huge that it was half the brilliance of Prabaker's own, and set to such energetic head-waggling in return that I was, at first, a little alarmed. By journey's end, however, I'd had enough practice to perform the movement as casually as others in the carriage did, and to convey the gentle message of the gesture. It was the first truly Indian expression my body learned, and it was the beginning of a transformation that has ruled my life, in all the long years since that journey of crowded hearts. We left the railway at Jalgaon, a regional center that boasted wide streets of commerce and bustle. It was 9 o'clock, and the morning rush was in rumble, roll, rattle, and swing. Raw materials, iron, glass, wood, textiles, and plastic, were being unloaded from the train as we left the station. A range of products, from pottery to clothing to handwoven tatami mats, was arriving at the station for dispatch to the cities. The aroma of fresh, highly spiced food stirred my appetite, but Prabaker urged me on to the bus terminal. In fact, the terminal was simply a vast open patch of rough ground that served as a staging area for dozens of long-distance coaches. We drifted from bus to bus for half an hour, carrying our bulky luggage. I couldn't read the Hindi and Marathi texts on the front and side of each bus. Prabaker could read the signs, but still he felt it necessary to ask every driver about his destination. "Doesn't it tell you where every bus is going, on the front of the bus?" I demanded, irritated by the delay. "Yes, Lynn. See, this one says Aurangabad, and that one says Ajanta, and that one says Chalaskayo, and that one says..." Yeah. So, why do we have to ask every driver where he's going?" "Oh," he exclaimed, genuinely surprised by the question. "Because not every sign is a truly sign." "What do you mean, not a truly sign?" He stopped, putting down his share of the luggage, and offered me a smile of indulgent patience. "Well, Lynn, you see, some of those driving fellows are going to places that as nobody wants to go to. Little places, they are, with a few people only. So, they put a sign for a more popular place. You're telling me that they put a sign up saying they're going to a big town, where lots of people want to go, but they're really going somewhere else, where nobody wants to go." "That's right, Lynn," he beamed. "Why? You see, because those people who come to them, to go to the popular place, well, maybe the driver can convince them to go to the not popular place. It's for business, Lynn. It's a business thing." "That's crazy," I said, exasperated. "You must have it a bit of sympathies for these fellows, Lynn. If they put the truly sign on their bus, no one will talk to them, in the whole day, and they will be very lonely." "Oh, well, now I understand," I muttered, sarcastically. "We wouldn't want them to feel lonely." "I know, Lynn," Prabaker smiled. "You have a very good hearts in your bodies." When at last we did board a bus, it seemed that ours was one of the popular destinations. The driver and his assistant interrogated the passengers, to determine precisely where each man or woman intended to set down, before allowing them to enter the bus. Those traveling the furthest were then directed to fill the rear seats. The rapidly accumulating piles of luggage, children, and livestock filled the aisle to shoulder height, and eventually 3 passengers crowded into every seat designed for 2. Because I had an aisle seat, I was required to take my turn at passing various items, from bundles to babies, backwards over the loaded aisle. The young farmer who passed the first item to me hesitated for a moment, staring into my gray eyes. When I wiggled my head from side to side, and smiled, he grinned in return and handed the bundle to me. By the time the bus rolled out of the busy terminal, I was accepting smiles and head wiggles from every man in sight, and waggling and wiggling at them in return. The sign behind the driver's head, in large red letters in Marathi and English, said that the bus was strictly licensed to seat 48 passengers. No one seemed concerned that we were 70 passengers and 2 or 3 tons of cargo. The old Bedford bus swayed on its exhausted springs like a tugboat in a storm tide. Creaks and groans and squeaks issued from the top, sides, and floor of the bus, and the brakes squealed alarmingly with every application. Nevertheless, when the bus left the city limits, the driver managed to crank it up to 80 or 90 kilometers per hour. Given the narrow road, the precipitous fall on the low side, the frequent columns of people and animals that lined the high side, the titanic mass of our swaying arc of a bus, and the vertiginous hostility with which the driver negotiated every curve, the speed was sufficient to relieve me of the need to sleep or relax on the ride. During the following 3 hours of that perilous acceleration, we rose to the peak of a ridge of mountains marking the edge of a vast plateau, known as the Deccan, and descended once more to fertile plains within the rim of the plateau. With prayers of gratitude and a new appreciation for the fragile gift of life, we left that first bus at a small, dusty, deserted stop that was marked only by a tattered flag flapping from the branch of a slender tree. Within an hour a second bus stopped. Gora Khan Hain? The driver asked, when we climbed aboard the step. Who's the white guy? Maza Mitra Ahey. Prabhakar answered with contrived nonchalance, trying in vain to disguise his pride. He's my friend. The exchange was in Marathi, the language of Maharashtra state, which has Bombay as its capital. I didn't understand much of it then, but the same questions and answers were repeated so often during those village months that I learned most of the phrases, with some variations, by heart. What's he doing here? He's visiting my family. Where's he from? New Zealand, Prabhakar replied. New Zealand? Yes, New Zealand. In Europe. Plenty of money in New Zealand? Yes, plenty. They're all rich, white people there. Does he speak Marathi? No. Hindi? No, only English. Only English? Yes. Why? They don't speak Hindi in his country. They don't speak Hindi there? No. No Marathi? No Hindi? No, only English. Holy Father. The poor fool. Yes. How old is he? 30. He looks older. They all do. All the Europeans look older and angrier than they really are. It's a white thing. Is he married? No. Not married? 30 and not married? What's wrong with him? He's European. A lot of them get married only when they're old. That's crazy. Yes. What job does he do? He's a teacher. A teacher is good. Yes. Does he have a mother and a father? Yes. Where are they? In his native place, New Zealand. Why isn't he with them? He's traveling. He's looking at the whole world. Why? Europeans do that. They work for a while and then they travel around, lonely, for a while, with no family, until they get old, and then they get married, and become very serious. That's crazy. Yes. He must be lonely, without his mummy and his daddy, and with no wife and children. Yes. But the Europeans don't mind. They get a lot of practice being lonely. He has a big strong body. Yes. A very strong body. Yes. Make sure you feed him properly, and give him plenty of milk. Yes. Buffalo milk. Yes. And make sure he doesn't learn any bad words. Don't teach him any swearing. There are plenty of assholes and bastards around who will teach him the wrong sisterfucking words. Keep him away from motherfuckers like that. I will. And don't let anyone take advantage of him. He doesn't look too bright. Keep an eye on him. He's brighter than he looks, but yes, I will look after him. It troubled none of the other passengers on the bus that the conversation of several minutes had taken place before we could board the bus and move off. The driver and Prabhakar had made sure to speak at a volume adequate to the task of including everyone in the bus. Indeed, once we were underway, the driver sought to include even those outside the bus in the novelty of the experience. Whenever he spied men and women strolling on the road, he sounded the horn to draw their attention, gesticulated with his thumb to indicate the foreigner in the rear of the bus, and slowed to a crawl, so that each pedestrian could examine me with satisfactory thoroughness. With such democratic rationing of the astounding new attraction, the journey of 1 hour took closer to 2, and we arrived at the dusty road to Sunder village in the late afternoon. The bus groaned and heaved away, leaving us in a silence so profound that the breeze against my ears was like a child's sleepy whisper. We'd passed countless fields of maize and banana groves in the last hour of the bus ride, and then on foot we trudged along the dirt road between endless rows of millet plants. Almost fully grown, the plants were well over head height, and in a few minutes of the walk we were deep within a thick-walled labyrinth. The wide sky shrank to a small arc of blue, and the way ahead or behind us dissolved into curves of green and gold, like curtains drawn across the living stage of the world. I'd been preoccupied for some time, nagged by something that it seemed I should have known or realized. The thought, half submerged, troubled me for the best part of an hour before it swam into the field of vision of my mind's eye. No telegraph poles, no power poles. For most of that hour I'd seen no sign of electric power, not even distant power lines. Is there electricity in your village? Oh, no, Prabaker grinned. No electricity? No, none. There was silence, for a time, as I slowly turned off all the appliances I'd come to regard as essential. No electric light, no electric kettle, no television, no hi-fi, no radio, no music. I didn't even have a Walkman with me. How would I live without music? What am I going to do without music? I asked, aware of how pathetic I sounded, but unable to suppress the whine of disappointment in my voice. There will be music full, Baba, he answered cheerfully. I will sing. Everybody will sing. We will sing and sing and sing. Oh, well, now I feel all right. And you will sing, too, Lin. Don't count on it, Prabhu. In the village, everybody sings, he said with sudden seriousness. Yes, everybody. Let's cross that bridge and chorus when we come to it. How much further is it to the village? Oh, just a little bit, almost not too very far. And now we have water in our village also. What do you mean, now you have water? What I mean is, there is one tap in the village now. One tap. For the whole village. Yes. And the water is coming out of it for 1 whole hour, at 2 o'clock in every afternoon. 1 whole hour per day. Oh, yes. Well, on most days. Some days it is only coming for half an hour. Some days it is not coming out at all. Then we go back and scrape the green stuff off the top of the water in the well, and we are no problem for water. Ah, look, here is my father. Ahead of us, on the rambling and weedy path, was an ox cart. The ox, a huge curve-horned beast, the color of café latte, was shackled to a tall, basket-shaped cart mounted on 2 wooden, steel-rimmed wheels. The wheels were narrow but high, reaching to my shoulder. Smoking a beady cigarette and sitting on the ox bow-yoke, his legs dangling free, was Prabaker's father. Kishan Mangokar was a tiny man, shorter even than Prabaker, with very close-cropped gray hair, a short, gray mustache, and a prominent paunch on his otherwise slender frame. He wore the white cap, cotton kurta shirt, and dhoti of the farmer caste. The dhoti is technically described as a loincloth, but the term robs the garment of its serene and graceful elegance. It can be gathered up to become work shorts for labor in the fields, or loosened to become pantaloon-style trousers with the ankles free. The dhoti itself is always moving, and it follows the human contour in every act from running to sitting still. It captures every breeze at noon, and keeps out the dawn chill. It's modest and practical, yet flattering and attractive at the same time. Gandhi gave the dhoti prominence on his trips to Europe in the struggle for Indian independence from England. With all due respect to the Mahatma, however, it's not until you live and work with India's farmers that you fully appreciate the gentle and ennobling beauty of that simple wrap of fabric. Prabaker dropped his bags and ran forward. His father sprang from his seat on the yoke, and they embraced shyly. The older man's smile was the only smile I've ever seen that rivaled Prabaker's own. It was a vast smile, using the whole of the face, as if he'd been frozen in the middle of a belly laugh. When Prabaker turned to face me, beside his father, subjecting me to a double dose of the gigantic smile, the original, and its slightly grander genetic copy, the effect was so overwhelming that I found myself grinning helplessly in return. Lin, this is my father, Kishan Mangokar. And father, this is Mr. Lin. I am happy, too much happy, that you are meeting each other's good selves. We shook hands, and stared into one another's eyes. Prabaker and his father had the same almost perfectly round face and the same upturned, button nose. However, where Prabaker's face was completely open, guileless, and unlined, his father's face was deeply wrinkled, and when he wasn't smiling, there was a weary shadow that closed over his eyes. It was as if he'd sealed shut some doors in himself, and stood guard over them, with his eyes alone. There was pride in his face, but he was sad, and tired, and worried. It took me a long time to realize that all farmers, everywhere, are just as tired, worried, proud, and sad. That the soil you turn and the seed you sow are all you really have, when you live and work the earth. And sometimes, much too often, there's nothing more than that, the silent, secret, heartbreaking joy God puts into things that bloom and grow. to help you face the fear of hunger and the dread of evil. My father is a very success man, Prabaker beamed, proudly, his arm around the older man's shoulders. I spoke very little Marathi, and Kashan spoke no English, so Prabaker repeated everything in both languages. Hearing the phrase in his own language, Kashan lifted his shirt with a graceful, artless flourish, and patted at his hairy pot-belly. His eyes glittered as he spoke to me, waggling his head all the while in what seemed to be an unnervingly seductive leer. What did he say? He wants you to pat his tummies, Prabaker explained, grinning. Kashan grinned as widely. I don't think so. Oh, yes, Lin. He wants you to pat his tummies. No. He really wants you to give it a pat, he persisted. Tell him I'm flattered, and I think it's a fine tummies. But tell him I think I'll pass, Prabhu. Just give it a little pat, Lin. No, I said, more firmly. Kashan's grin widened, and he raised his eyebrows several times in encouragement. He still held the shirt up to his chest, exposing the round, hairy paunch. Go on, Lin. A few pats only. It won't bite you, my father's tummies. Sometimes you have to surrender, Carla said, before you win. And she was right. Surrender is at the heart of the Indian experience. I gave in. Glancing around me, on the deserted track, I reached out and patted the warm and fuzzy belly. Just then, of course, the tall green stalks of millet beside us on the path separated to reveal 4 dark brown faces. They were young men. They stared at us, their eyes wide with the kind of amazement that's afraid, appalled, and delighted at the same time. Slowly, and with as much dignity as I could muster, I withdrew my hand from Kashan's stomach. He looked at me, and then at the others, with one eyebrow raised and the corners of his mouth drawn down into the smug smile of a police prosecutor, resting his case. I don't want to intrude on your dad's moment here, Prabhu, but don't you think we should be getting along? Chalo, Kashan announced, making a guess at the meaning of my words. Let's go. As we loaded our gear and climbed into the back of the cart, Kashan took his seat on the yoke attached to the ox bow, raised a long bamboo stick that had a nail driven into the end of it, and moved us off with a tremendous blow to the animal's haunches. Responding to the violent blow, the ox gave a lurch forward, and then set off with ponderous, thudding slowness. Our steady but very sluggish progress caused me to wonder at the choice of that beast, above others, to perform the task. It seemed to me that the Indian ox, known as the Bailey, was surely the slowest harness animal in the world. If I'd climbed down from the cart, and walked at a moderate pace, I would have doubled its speed. In fact, the people who'd stared at us through the millet plants were rushing ahead through the dense crops at the sides of the path to announce our arrival. Every 20 to 50 meters or so, new faces appeared between the parted stalks of maize, corn, and millet. The expression on those faces was always the same, frank, stupefying, goggle-eyed amazement. If Prabaker and his father had captured a wild bear, and trained it to speak, the people couldn't have reacted with more gape-mouthed astonishment. The people are too happy, Prabaker laughed. You are the first person from foreign to visit my village in 21 years. The last foreign fellow coming here was from Belgium. That was 21 years ago. All the people who are less than 21 years old have never seen a foreigner with their own eyes. That last fellow, that one from Belgium, he was a good man. But you are a very, very good man, Lin. The people will love you too much. You will be so happy here, you will be outside yourself. You will see. The people who stared at me from the groves and bushes at the side of the road seemed more anguished and threatened than happy. In the hope of dispelling that trepidation, I began to practice my Indian head wiggle. The reaction was immediate. The people smiled, laughed, wiggled their heads in return, and ran ahead, shouting to their neighbors about the entertaining spectacle that was plodding along the track towards them. To ensure the unflagging progress of the ox, Kashan beat the animal fiercely and often. The stick rose and fell with a resounding smack at regular intervals of minutes. The rhythm of those heavy blows was punctuated by sharp jabs at the animal's flanks with the nail attached to the end of the stick. Each thrust penetrated the thick hide, and raised a little tuft of cream-brown fur. The ox didn't react to those assaults, other than to continue its lumbering, drag-footed advance along the path. Nevertheless, I suffered for the beast. Each blow and jab accumulated within my sympathy until it was more than I could bear. Prabhu, do me a favor, please ask your father to stop hitting the animal, Stop hitting? Yeah. Ask him to stop hitting the ox, please. No, it is not possible, Lin, he replied, laughing. The stick slammed into the broad back of the ox, and was followed by 2 quick jabs of the nail. I mean it, Prabhu. Please ask him to stop. But, Lin. I flinched, as the stick came down again, and my expression pleaded with him to intervene. Reluctantly, Prabhakar passed on my request to his father. Kishan listened intently, and then laughed helplessly in a fit of giggles. After a time, he perceived his son's distress, however, and the laughter subsided, and finally died, in a flurry of questions. Prabhakar did his best to answer them, but at last he turned his increasingly forlorn expression to me once more. My father, Lin, he wants to know why you want him to stop using the stick. I don't want him to hurt the ox. This time Prabhakar laughed, and when he was able to translate my words for his father, they both laughed. They talked for a while, still laughing, and then Prabhakar addressed me again. My father is asking, is it true that in your country people are eating cows? Well, yes, it's true. But, how many of the cows do you eat there? We export them from my country. We don't eat them all ourselves. How many? Oh, hundreds of thousands of them. Maybe millions, if you count the sheep. But we use humane methods, and we don't believe in unnecessarily hurting them. My father is saying, he thinks it is very hard to eat one of these big animals, without hurting it. He then sought to explain my nature to his father by recounting for him the story of how I'd given up my seat, on the train journey, to allow an elderly man to sit, how I shared my fruit and other food with my fellow passengers, and how I often gave to beggars on the streets of Bombay. Kishan pulled the cart to a sudden stop, and jumped down from the wooden yoke. He fired a stream of commands at Prabhakar, who finally turned to me to translate. My father wants to know if we have any presents with us, from Bombay, for him and the family. I told him we did. Now he wants us to give those presents to him here, and in this place, before we go any more along the road. He wants us to go through our bags, here, on this track? Yes. He is afraid that when we get to Sundar village, you will have a good hearts, and give away all those presents to other people, and he will not get his presents. He wants all his presents now. So we did. Under the indigo banner of early evening sky, on the scratch of track between fields of undulant maize and millet, we spread out the colors of India, the yellows and reds and peacock blues of shirts and lungi wraps and saris. Then we repacked them, with fragrant soaps and sewing needles, incense and safety pins, perfume and shampoo and massage oils, so that one full bag contained only those things we'd brought for Prabhakar's family. With that bag safely tucked behind him on the rails of the ox cart harness, Kishan Mangokar launched us on the last leg of our journey by striking the dumbly patient ox more often, and with a good deal more vigor, than he'd done before I tried to intercede on its behalf. And then, at last, it was the voices of women and children, raised in laughter and cries of excitement, that welcomed us. The sounds reached us moments before we turned the last sharp curve and entered the village of Sundar along a single, wide street of swept, pressed, golden river sand. On either side were the houses, distributed so that no house faced into another across the street. The houses were round, made of pale brown mud, with round windows and curved doors. The roofs were made with little domes of thatched grasses. Word had spread that the foreigner was arriving. The 200 souls of Sundar village had been joined by hundreds more from neighboring villages. Kishan drove us into the throng, stopping outside his own home. He was grinning so widely that everyone who looked at him was moved to laugh in return. We climbed down from the cart, and stood with our luggage at our feet in the center of 600 stares and whispers. A breath-filled silence settled on the crowd, packed so tightly that each one pressed upon his neighbor. They were so close to me that I could feel the breath upon my face. 600 pairs of eyes fixed me with the intensity of their fascination. No one spoke. Prabhakar was at my side, and although he smiled and enjoyed the celebrity that the moment gave him, he too was awed by the press of attention and the surrounding wall of wonderment and expectation. I suppose you're wondering why I've called you all here, I said, in just the serious tone of voice that would have been funny if there'd been a single person in the crowd who understood the joke. No one did, of course, and the silence thickened, as even the faint murmurs died away. What do you say to a huge crowd of strangers who are waiting for you to say something, and who don't speak your language? My backpack was at my feet. In the top flap pocket there was a souvenir that a friend had given me. It was a jester's cap, in black and white, complete with bells on the ends of its 3 cloth horns. The friend, an actor in New Zealand, had made the jester's cap as part of a costume. At the airport, with minutes to go before my flight to India, he'd given me the cap as a good luck charm, a remembrance of him, and I'd stuffed it into the top of my backpack. There's a kind of luck that's not much more than being in the right place at the right time, a kind of inspiration that's not much more than doing the right thing in the right way, and both only really happen to you when you empty your heart of ambition, purpose, and plan. When you give yourself, completely, to the golden, fate-filled moment. I took the jester's cap out of the pack and put it on, pulling it tight under my chin, and straightening the cloth horns with my fingers. Everyone at the front of the crowd drew back with a little inrushing gasp of alarm. Then I smiled, and wiggled my head, ringing the bells. "Hello, folks," I said, "it's show time." The effect was electrifying. Everyone laughed. The entire group of women, children, and men erupted as one, laughing and joking and crying out. One person reached out to touch me on the shoulder. The children at the front reached for my hands. Then everyone within grasping distance patted, stroked, and grabbed me. I caught Prabaker's eye. The look of joy and pride I found there was a kind of prayer. He permitted the gentle assault for some minutes, and then asserted his authority over the new attraction by clearing the crowd away. He succeeded, at last, in opening the way to his father's house and, as we entered the dark circle of Kishan's home, the chattering, laughing crowd began to disperse. "You must have a bath, Lynn. After such a long travel you must be smelling unhappy. Come this way. My sisters have already heated the water on the fire. The pots are ready for your bath. Come." We passed through a low arch, and he led me to an area beside the house that was enclosed on 3 sides by hanging tatami mats. Flat river stones formed a shower base, and 3 large clay pots of warm water were arranged near them. A channel had been dug and smoothed out, allowing water to run off behind the house. Prabaker told me that a small brass jug was to be used to tip water over my body, and gave me the soap dish. I'd been unlacing my boots while he spoke, and I cast them aside, threw off my shirt, and pulled off my jeans. "Lynn!" Prabaker screamed in panic, leaping, in a single bound, across the 2 meters that separated us. He tried to cover my body with his hands, but then looked around in anguish to see that the towel was on my backpack, a further 2 meters away. He jumped for the towel, snatched it up, and jumped back, giving a little shout of panic, "Yah!" each time. He wrapped the towel around me, and looked around in terror. "Have you gone crazy, Lynn? What are you doing?" "I'm trying to take a shower." "But like that? Like that? What's the matter with you, Prabhu? You told me to take a shower. You brought me here to have a shower. So, I'm trying to take a shower, but you're jumping around like a rabbit. What's your problem? You were naked, Lynn. Naked, without any clothes also." "That's how I take a shower," I said, exasperated by his mysterious terror. He was darting about, peering through the tatami matting at various places. "That's how everyone takes a shower, isn't it?" "No, no, no, Lynn," he corrected, returning to face me. A desperate expression contorted his normally happy features. "You don't take your clothes off?" "No, Lynn. This is India. Nobody can take his clothes off, not even to wash his bodies. This is India. Nobody is ever naked in India. And especially, nobody is naked without clothes. So, how do you take a shower? We wear it the underpants for having a bath in India." "Well, that's fine," I said, dropping the towel to reveal my black jockey shorts. "I'm wearing underpants." "Yah!" Prabaker screamed, diving for the towel and covering me again. "Those teeny pieces, Lynn? Those are not the underpants. Those are the underpants only. You must have it the over underpants." "The over underpants?" "Yes, certainly. Like these, my ones, that I am wearing." He unbuttoned his own trousers enough to show me that he wore a pair of green shorts under his clothes. In India, the men are wearing this over underpants, under their clothes, at all times, and in all the situations. Even if they are wearing underpants, still they are wearing over underpants, over their unders. You see? No. Well, just you wait here. I will get you some over underpants for your bath. But don't remove your towel. Please. Promise. If the people see you without the towel, in such teeny pieces, they will be like a wild people. Wait here. He darted off, and after a few minutes returned with 2 pairs of red football shorts. Here, Lin, he puffed. You are such a big fellow. I hope we can get a good fits. These are from Fat Sadish. He is so fat, I think they might fit you. I told him a story, and then he gave it this 2 pairs for you. I told him that on the journey you had loose motions, and you made such a mess in your over-underpants that we had to throw them away. You told him, I asked, that I shit my pants? Oh, yes, Lin. I certainly couldn't tell him that you have no over-underpants. Well, of course not. I mean, what would he be thinking about you? Thank you, Prabhu, I muttered, through clenched teeth. If my tone had been any drier I wouldn't have needed a towel. That is my pleasure, Lin. I am your very good friend. So please, promise me that you will not be naked in India. Especially not without your clothes. I promise. I am so glad you make this promise, Lin. You are my very good friend, too, isn't it? Now I will take a bath also, like we are 2 brothers, and I will show you the Indian style. So, we both took a shower, in the bathing area of his father's house. Watching him, and following his lead, I wet my body in a first rinse with 2 jugs of water from one of the large pots, and worked the soap beneath my shorts without ever taking them off. After the final rinse, and a quick dry off with the towel, he taught me how to tie a lungi around the wet shorts. The lungi was a sarong-like rectangle of cotton, worn from waist to ankle. He gathered 2 long ends or corners of the lungi at the front, and then passed them around my waist, and rolled them under the top edge, in the small of my back. Within the encircling lungi, I removed and discarded my wet shorts and slipped on a dry pair of shorts underneath. With that technique, Prabhakar assured me, I could take a shower in the open, and not offend his neighbors. After the shower, and a delicious meal of dal, rice, and homemade flatbreads, Prabhakar and I watched as his parents and his 2 sisters opened their presents. We drank tea then, and for 2 hours we answered questions about me and my home and family. I tried to answer truthfully, without the crucial truth that in my hunted exile, I didn't think I would ever see my home or family again. At last, Prabhakar announced that he was too tired to translate anymore, and that I should be permitted to rest. A bed made from the wood of coconut trees and with a stretched mattress, formed from a web of coconut fiber rope, was set up for me in the open, outside Kishan's house. It was Kishan's own bed. Prabhakar told me that it might take 2 days to have a new one made to his father's satisfaction. Until then Kishan would sleep beside his son on the floor of the house, while I used his bed. I tried to resist, but my protests drowned in the sea of their gentle, relentless insistence. So I lay down on the poor farmer's bed, and my first night in that first Indian village ended, as it had begun, with surrender. Prabhakar told me that his family and his neighbors were concerned that I would be lonely, that I must be lonely, in a strange place, without my own family. They decided to sit with me on that first night, mounting a vigil in the dark until they were sure that I was peacefully deep in sleep. After all, the little guide remarked, people in my country, in my village, would do the same for him if he went there and missed his family, wouldn't they? They sat on the ground around my low bed, Prabhakar and his parents and his neighbors, keeping me company in the warm, dark, cinnamon-scented night, and forming a ring of protection around me. I thought that it would be impossible to sleep within a circle of spectators, but in minutes I began to float and drift on the murmuring tide of their voices. Soft and rhythmic waves that swirled beneath a fathomless night of bright, whispering stars. At one point, Prabhakar's father reached out from his place at my left side to rest his hand on my shoulder. It was a simple gesture of kindness and comfort, but its effect on me was profound. A moment before, I'd been drifting toward sleep. Suddenly I was hard awake. I plunged into memories and thoughts of my daughter, my parents, my brother, of the crimes I'd committed, and the loves I'd betrayed and lost forever. It may seem strange, and it may in fact be impossible for anyone else to understand, but until that very moment I'd had no real comprehension of the wrong I'd done, and the life I'd lost. While I'd committed the armed robberies, I was on drugs, addicted to heroin. An opiate fog had settled over everything that I thought and did and even remembered about that time. Afterwards, during the trial and the 3 years in prison, I was sober and clear-headed, and I should have known then what the crimes and punishments meant, for myself and my family and the people I'd robbed at the point of a gun. But I didn't know or feel anything of it then. I was too busy being punished, and feeling punished, to put my heart around it. Even with the escape from prison, and the flight, running and hiding as a wanted man, a hunted man with a price on my head, even then, there was no final, clear, encompassing grasp of the acts and the consequences that made up the new, bitter story of my life. It was only there, in the village in India, on that first night, adrift on the raft of murmuring voices, and my eyes filled with stars. Only then, when another man's father reached out to comfort me, and placed a poor farmer's rough and calloused hand on my shoulder. Only there and then did I see and feel the torment of what I'd done, and what I'd become, the pain and the fear and the waste. The stupid, unforgivable waste of it all. My heart broke on its shame and sorrow. I suddenly knew how much crying there was in me, and how little love. I knew, at last, how lonely I was. But I couldn't respond. My culture had taught me all the wrong things well. So I lay completely still, and gave no reaction at all. But the soul has no culture. The soul has no nations. The soul has no color or accent or way of life. The soul is forever. The soul is one. And when the heart has its moment of truth and sorrow, the soul can't be stilled. I clenched my teeth against the stars. I closed my eyes. I surrendered to sleep. One of the reasons why we crave love, and seek it so desperately, is that love is the only cure for loneliness, and shame, and sorrow. But some feelings sink so deep into the heart that only loneliness can help you find them again. Some truths about yourself are so painful that only shame can help you live with them. And some things are just so sad that only your soul can do the crying for you. Chapter 6. Prabaker's father introduced me to Sunder village, but it was his mother who made me feel at home there. Her life enfolded mine within its triumph and sorrow, just as easily as her red shawl sometimes inswathed the crying child that passed the doorway of her house. Her story, told to me by many voices, month after month, became all the stories, even my own. And her love, her willingness to know the truth of my heart and to love me, changed the course of my life. When I first met her, Rukmabai Kaur was 40 years old, and at the peak of her personal power and public prestige. She was a full head and shoulder taller than her husband, and that difference in height, combined with her ample, curvaceous figure, gave the false impression that she was something of an Amazon whenever the couple stood together. Her black hair, gleaming with coconut oil, had never been cut, and the majestic rope of it reached to her knees. Her skin was tan brown. Her eyes were the color of amber, set in rose gold. The whites of her eyes were pink, always, giving the impression that she just cried or was just about to cry. A wide gap between her front teeth gave an impish mischief to her smile, while the superb hook of her beaked nose endowed her serious expressions with an imposing authority. Her forehead was high and wide. It was Prabaker's forehead, exactly, and the high curves of her cheekbones were the mountains from which her amber eyes studied the world. She had a ready wit, and a deep sympathy for the distress of others. She stood aloof from disputes between her neighbors until she was asked to give her opinion, and then hers was usually the last word. She was a woman to admire and to desire, but the message in her eye and her bearing was unmistakable: offend or disesteem her at your peril. The force of her personality maintained a status in the village that was derived from Kashan's ownership of land and her stewardship of their small personal fortune. Her marriage to Kashan had been arranged. As a shy 16-year-old, she'd peeped from behind a curtain to inspect her betrothed, seeing him then for the first and only time before the marriage. When I learned to speak her language well enough, she told me with disarming candor how disappointed she'd been when she'd scrutinized Kashan for the first time. He was short. His skin, tanned by farmer's toil until it matched the dark brown earth itself, was darker than hers, and that had worried her. His hands were rough and his speech was coarse. His clothes were clean but drab. And he was illiterate. Her father was head of a village council, a panchayat, and Rukmabai could read and write, in Hindi and Marathi. As she looked at Kashan that first time, her heart beating its secrets so furiously that she feared he would hear it, she felt sure she couldn't love him, and that she was marrying beneath her status. At the very moment of that distressing realization, Kashan turned his head to stare directly at the hiding place, where she crouched behind the curtain. She was certain that he couldn't see her, yet he stared as if he was looking into her eyes. Then he smiled. It was the biggest smile she'd ever seen. It was radiant and suffused with an irrepressible good humor. She looked into that prodigious smile, and a strange feeling took hold of her. She smiled back at him, despite herself, and felt a rush of well-being, an indefinable but overwhelmingly sanguine cheerfulness. "Things will turn out right," the voice of her heart said to her. "Everything will be all right." She knew, just as I'd known when I saw Prabaker for the first time, that no man who smiled with so much of his heart would knowingly hurt or harm another. When he looked away again, it was as if the room had darkened, and she understood that she'd begun to love him for the reassuring incandescence of his smile alone. She offered no protest when her father announced the marriage arrangement, and within 2 months of that first glimpse of Kashan's magic smile she was wed, and pregnant with her first son, Prabaker. Kashan's father settled 2 fertile fields on his eldest son at the time of the marriage, and Rukmabai's father added a third to the young couple's endowment. From the earliest days of their union, the young bride assumed control of their small wealth. Using her reading and writing skills, she kept meticulous records of their profits and losses in simple school exercise books, which she tied into bundles and stored in a zinc trunk. Judicious investments in the enterprises of her neighbors and a careful husbanding of their resources ensured that their losses were few. With the birth of their third child, when she was 25 years old, Rukmabai had driven their modest fortune to become the largest in the village. They owned 5 fields. They planted cash crops. They kept 3 milking buffalo and 3 oxen, as well as 2 milking goats and a dozen laying hens. There was money in the bank sufficient to provide substantial dowries for her 2 daughters. The girls would marry well, she resolved, and give higher status to her grandchildren. When he was 9 years old, Prabaker was sent to Bombay, where he was apprenticed to an uncle who drove a taxi, and lived in a large inner-city slum. Rukmabai began to expand her morning prayers, with the hopes and plans she made for the future of her family. Then she suffered a miscarriage. In less than a year, she miscarried twice more. Doctors concluded that her uterus had been scarred after the birth of her third child. They recommended, and carried out, a total hysterectomy. She was 26 years old. Rukmabai's heart wandered through the empty rooms of her life. The rooms reserved for the 3 babies lost in miscarriages, and all the other lives that might have been. For 2 years she was inconsolable. Even Kashan's wonderful smile, summoned through his own tears, failed to rouse her. Forlorn and broken-hearted, she languished in misery in the minimal routine of caring for her daughters. The laughter went out of her, and sadness settled on the neglected fields. Rukmabai's soul was dying, and she might have fallen into that sorrow forever, but a cataclysmic event that threatened the whole village roused her from her grieving. A band of dacoits, or armed bandits, settled in the area and began to demand tributes. A man in a neighboring village was hacked with a machete. A woman in the same village was raped by the dacoits. Then they shot and killed a resistor in Kashan's village. Rukmabai had known the dead man very well. He'd been one of Kashan's cousins, and had married a girl from Rukmabai's own village. Every man, woman, and child in Sundar attended the funeral. At its end, Rukmabai addressed the assembled villagers. Her hair was awry, and her amber eyes blazed with rage and determination. She harangued those who wanted to appease the dacoits, exhorting them to resist and fight and kill, if necessary, in defense of their lives and their land. Astonished as much by her sudden animation, after 2 years of grief's torpor, as by her martial speech, the villagers were inspirited. There and then, they devised a plan of action and resistance. Word reached the dacoits that the people of Sundar village were determined to fight. Threats, skirmishes, and exploratory raids finally led the boiling conflict to the point where a battle was inevitable. The dacoits delivered a menacing warning that on a given day the villagers must surrender a considerable tribute or suffer terrible consequences. The people armed themselves with sickles, axes, staves, and knives. The women and children were evacuated to a neighboring village. Fear and regret swept through the ranks of the men who remained. Several men argued that their struggle was foolhardy, and that tribute was less painful than death. The brothers of the murdered man stalked among them, giving encouragement and consolation while they castigated the backsliders for their cowardice. The alarm went up that men were approaching on the city road. The villagers concealed themselves behind hastily erected barricades between their mud houses. Exhilarated and afraid, they were at the point of striking when they realized that the men were allies. Hearing of the war with the dacoits a week before, Prabaker had gathered a group of 6 friends and cousins from the city slum, where he lived, and he'd set out to join his family. He was just 15 at the time, and the eldest of his friends was only 18, but they were street fighters from one of Bombay's toughest quarters. One of them, Raju, a tall boy with the handsome face and bouffant hairstyle of a Bombay movie star, had a gun. He showed the pistol to the villagers and gave hard to them all. The dacoits, arrogant and overconfident, swaggered into the village half an hour before sunset. The first blood-curdling threat was still on their leader's lips when Raju stepped from his concealment and walked toward the bandits, firing once for every third step. Axes, sickles, knives, staves, and rocks poured from the barricade walls, hurled to deadly effect by the desperate farmers. Raju never broke his stride, and with his last bullet he struck the leader of the dacoits in the chest at close range. The man was dead, the villagers said, before he hit the ground. The rest of the wounded dacoits scattered, and were never seen again. The body of the fallen leader was carried to Jamner District Police Post. All the villagers told the same story. They'd resisted the dacoits, and in the confusion of battle the bandits had shot one of their own men. Raju's name was never mentioned. After feasting for 2 days, the young men returned with Prabhakar to the city. Wild, brave Raju died in a barroom fight a year later. 2 of the other boys died in similarly violent circumstances. Another was serving a long sentence in prison for a crime of passion, involving the love of an actress and the enmity of a rival. The villagers told me about the great battle many times as I learned to speak the Marathi language. They took me to the historic sites where the concealments and confrontations had occurred. They walked me through reenactments of the event, the younger men often competing for the honor of playing Raju's part. No less important, in the telling of the tale, were the stories of the young men who'd fought beside them. The fate of each one, learned from Prabhakar on his visits to the village, was recalled and told to me as part of the great saga. And through all of the stories and discussions, there was a special affection and pride for Rukmabai Kaur. They loved and admired her for the galvanizing role she'd played with her funeral speech, the first and last time she'd ever assumed a public position in the village. They acknowledged her courage, and they respected her strength of will. Above all, they celebrated her return to them, through the struggle with the dacoits, from grief and despair to the strong, shrewd, laughing woman she'd always been. In that poor and simple village, no one doubted or forgot that its treasures were its people. And it was all there, in her lovely face. The lines, high on her cheeks, were the dams she used to keep the tears in her eyes. Unspoken, unanswerable questions parted her full, red lips, whenever she was alone, or absorbed in her work. Determination stiffened the defiant thrust of her cleft chin. And her forehead was always slightly creased in the center, between the brows, as if she was grasping, in those soft folds of skin, the monstrous and pitiable understanding that no happiness exists without its woe, no wealth without its cost, and no life without its full measure, sooner or later, of sorrowing and death. My relationship with Rukmabai was established on the first morning. I'd slept well on the rope bed outside Kishan's house, so well, in fact, that I was still snoring loudly when Rukmabai drove her milking buffalo into the space, just after dawn. One of the creatures, drawn to the buzzing sound, decided to investigate. A wet, suffocating sensation woke me with a start of alarm. I opened my eyes to see the huge, pink tongue of a gigantic black water buffalo descending once again to smother my face. Shouting in fear and surprise, I fell off the bed and backed away on my hands and heels. Rukmabai led the laughter at my expense, but it was good laughter, honest and kind, and with no knives in it. When she reached down to help me up, I took her hand and laughed with her. "Gaye," she said, pointing to the buffalo, and establishing the ground rule that if we were to be communicating with words, I would be the one learning a foreign language. "Water buffalo." She took a glass and squatted by the udder of the immense, black, bow-horned beast to squeeze milk. I watched the milk squirt directly into the glass. She filled the glass with expert strokes, and then brought it to me, wiping the lip with the corner of her red cotton shawl. "I'm a city boy. I was born and raised in a fairly large city of 3 million people. One of the reasons I could remain for years on the run was that I love big cities, and feel completely confident and comfortable in them." The full range of a city boy's suspicion and dread of the country rose up in me when I held that glass of freshly squeezed milk. It was warm to the touch. It smelled of the cow. There seemed to be things floating in the glass. I hesitated. I had the sense that Louis Pasteur was standing just behind me, looking over my shoulder at the glass. I could hear him. I would boil that milk first, monsieur, if I were you. I swallowed prejudice, fear, and the milk all at once, gulping it down as quickly as possible. The taste was not as bad as I'd expected it to be, creamy and rich, and with a hint of dried grasses within the bovine aftertaste. Rukmabai snatched the glass from my hand and squatted down to fill it again, but my urgent, pleading protest convinced her that I was well satisfied with a single glass. When we'd made our toilet, washed our faces, and cleaned our teeth, Rukmabai stood over Prabaker and me while we ate a solid breakfast of roti and chai. The roti, or unleavened flatbreads, were made fresh for each breakfast, and cooked in a lightly oiled wok on an open fire. The hot, pancake-like bread was filled with a dab of ghee, or purified butter, and a large spoonful of sugar. It was then rolled into a tube, so thick that the hand only just curled around it, and eaten with a mug of hot, sweet, milky tea. Rukmabai watched every bite and chew, prodding us with a finger or slapping us on the head or shoulder if either of us showed the slightest inclination to pause for breath during the breakfast. Trapped, our jaws grinding away at the admittedly delicious food, we both cast surreptitious glances at the young women cooking at the wok, hoping that each roti, after the third or fourth we'd eaten, would be our last. And so, for all the many weeks, every day in the village began with a glass of buffalo milk, then with a wash and, at last, with a long chai roti breakfast. On most mornings, I joined the men in the fields tending to the crops of maize, corn, wheat, pulses, and cotton. The working day was divided into two brackets of about 3 hours, with a lunch break and siesta between. Children and young women brought the lunches to us in a multitude of stainless steel dishes. The meal usually consisted of the ubiquitous roti, spicy lentil dal, mango chutney, and raw onions, served with lime juice. After eating the meal as a group, the men moved off to find quiet, shady spots to doze in for an hour or so. When work resumed, the fed and rested workers applied themselves with great energy and enthusiasm until the senior man in the group called a halt. Assembling on one of the main pathways, the farmers then walked back past fields they'd sown and tended themselves, often laughing and joking all the way to the village. There was little work for the men to do in the village itself. Cooking, cleaning, washing, and even routine house maintenance were all done by the women, mostly younger women, supervised in their tasks by older women. On average, the village women worked a 4-hour day. They spent much of their free time playing with the young children. The village men worked 6 hours per day for an average 4-day week. Special efforts were required for plantings and harvests, but in general the Maharashtrian villagers worked fewer hours than working men and women in cities. It wasn't paradise. Some of the men exhausted themselves, after their work in the collective fields, trying to wring profits from a cash crop of cotton on a private patch of rocky ground. Rains came early or late. Fields flooded, or succumbed to the predations of insects and crop diseases. Women, with no outlet for their special creativities, endured the long, quiet ruin of their talents. Others watched the slow waste of bright children who could have been more and done more in some other, busier place, but never would know more than the village, the fields, and the river. Sometimes, rarely, a man or woman was so wretchedly miserable that the night for all of us, listening in the village dark, was ragged with sobbing. But, just as Prabaker had said, the people did sing almost every day. If an abundance of good food, laughter, singing, and an amiable disposition can be taken as indicators of well-being and happiness, then the villagers eclipsed their Western counterparts in those qualities of life. In my 6 months there, I never heard a cruel voice or saw a hand raised in anger. Moreover, the men and women in Prabaker's village were robustly healthy. The grandparents were plump, but not fat, the parents were bright-eyed and fit, and the children were straight-limbed, clever, and vivacious. And there was a sense of certainty, in the village, that no city I've ever known provides, the certainty that emerges when the soil, and the generations who work it, become interchangeable. When the identities of the human beings and the nature of the place are one and the same. Cities are centers of constant and irreversible change. The definitive sound of a city is the rattlesnake chatter of a jackhammer, the warning sound you hear as the business reptile strikes. But change in the village is perennial. What changes in nature is restored with one wheel of the seasons. What comes from the earth always returns. What flourishes, dies away to bloom again. And when I'd been in the village some 3 months, Rukmabai and the people of Sunder gave me a fragment of that certainty. a part of them and their lives that changed my life forever. On the day the monsoon began, I was swimming in the river with a dozen other young men and about 20 children. The dark clouds, which had painted their somber moods on the sky for weeks, gathered from horizon to horizon, and seemed to press upon the tops of the tallest trees. The air, after 8 dry months, was so lavishly perfumed with rain that we were almost drunk with excitement. Paus Allah, Salah Guri. The children cried repeatedly, grasping my hands. They pointed to the clouds and dragged me toward the village. The rain is coming. Let's go home. The first drops of rain fell as we ran. In seconds, the drops were a heavy fall. In minutes, the fall was a cascade. Within an hour, the monsoon was a ceaseless torrent, so thick that it was difficult to breathe in the open without cupping my hands to my mouth to make a little cave of air. At first, the villagers danced in the rain and played pranks on one another. Some took soap and washed in the heaven-sent shower. Some went to the local temple, where they knelt in the rain to pray. Others busied themselves with repairs to the roofs of their houses and the drainage trenches dug around every mud brick wall. Eventually, everyone stopped to simply stare at the drifting, flapping, curling sheets of rain. Every doorway of every house was crowded with faces, and each flash of lightning showed the frozen tableaus of wonder. That downpour of several hours was followed by a lull just as long. The sun shone intermittently, and rainwater steamed from the warming earth. The first 10 days of the season proceeded in the same way, with violent storms and tranquil lulls, as if the monsoon was probing the village for its weaknesses before mounting a final assault. Then, when the great rain came, it was a lake of water in the air, and it rained almost without pause for 7 days and nights. On the 7th day, I was at the river's edge, washing my few clothes as the drenching torrents fell. At one point I reached for my soap, and realized that the rock I'd placed it on was submerged. The water, which had merely caressed my bare feet, rose from my ankles to my knees in seconds. As I looked upstream at the tumbling crash of the river, the water reached to my thighs, and was still rising. Odd and uneasy, I waded from the water with my wet clothes, and began the walk to the village. On the way I stopped twice to watch the progress of the river. The steep banks were quickly swamped, and then the wide sloping plain began to subside beneath the all-immersing flood. The advance was so rapid that the inevitable creep of the swollen, land-consuming river moved toward the village at a slow walking pace. Alarmed, I ran to warn the villagers. The river is coming," I shouted, in broken Marathi. Sensing my distress but not really understanding me, the villagers gathered around and then called Prabhakar, plying him with questions. "What is your matter, Lin? The people are very upset for you. The river, it's coming up fast. It'll wipe the village out." Prabhakar smiled. "Oh, no, Lin. That will not be happening. I'm telling you, I've seen it. I'm not joking, Prabhu. The fucking river's in flood." Prabhakar translated my words for the others. Everyone laughed. "Are you all crazy?" I shouted, in exasperation. "It's not funny." They laughed all the harder and crowded around me, reaching out to calm my fear by patting and stroking me, their laughing voices full of soothing words and sighs. Then, with Prabhakar leading the way, the crowd of villagers goaded, dragged, and pushed me toward the river. The river, only a few hundred meters away, was a deluge. A vast muddy concrescence that tore through the valley in heaving waves and boiling eddies. The rain redoubled its intensity as we stood there, our clothes as drenched as the yielding soil. And still the tumid river grew, consuming new land with every thumping heartbeat. "You see those sticks, Lin," Prabhakar said, in his most irritating attempt at a soothing tone. "Those sticks are the flood game sticks. Do you remember when the people put them in the ground? Satish and Pandi Narayan and Bharat, do you remember?" I did remember. Days before, there'd been a lottery of some kind. 112 numbers, one for every man in the village, were written on small pieces of paper and mixed together in an empty clay water pot, called a matka. The men lined up to draw their numbers, and then a second set of the same numbers was mixed in the pot. A little girl was given the honor of drawing the 6 winning numbers from the pot. The whole village watched the ceremony and applauded the winners happily. The 6 men whose numbers had been drawn had won the chance to hammer a wooden stake, a little over a meter long, into the earth. As well, the 3 oldest men in the village were accorded the right to a wooden stake without the numbered lottery. They duly chose places for their stakes, and younger men obliged by hammering the wooden pegs into the ground. When all 9 stakes were positioned, little flags with the names of the men were tied to each one, and the people drifted back to their homes. I'd watched the affair from a shady spot beneath the branched dome of a tree. At the time, I was working on my own small reference dictionary of the Marathi language, based on phonetic spellings of the words I heard every day in the village. I gave the ceremony little attention, and I never bothered to ask its purpose.